Thank you. And I'm actually giving this talk for Renee Moran from Maine. So if you've got questions, I've got her cell number, and I'll hold it up, and we can check with her. Yeah. So Renee's project's kind of interesting because it's in an orchard a little bit different from ours. It's in an orchard up at the University of Maine. I've been working in the UVM orchard since before it was before we talked about it. And Renee put this planting in a few years ago. She was doing some work on grower sites, and she decided she wanted to look a little bit more intensively at ground cover because it's been such an issue, especially in those first 3 years. I know I take our department's weed science class around through the orchards and kind of tell them all the different things we've done over the years. And from 2006 to 2008, I did everything: mulching, flame weeding, hand weeding, cultivating. But it was all done on the whole orchard. And so she's been able to kind of break out some of these into some different treatments and to look at some preliminary stuff. So at the orchard, her orchard's a little bit younger than ours. It was planted in 2007, but the site is not irrigated. And so when we get to things like tree growth and fruit yields, keep that in mind, because there's years, especially in the earliest hours, when it really could have used some water. Honeycrisp and Snow Sweet, mowing 26, 3 study years, and we had a few different treatments in there. The first being a control of mowing, although by mistake, those both in 2010 and 2011, the control mowing actually got one application of this organic herbicide. So the control is one-time herbicide. There was another treatment with 2 times a year organic herbicide, a 3 times a year organic herbicide, a bark mulch applied once in 2009, and then when Renee saw a fair amount of weeds growing through the bark mulch, she decided to split that in half. So there was a bark mulch applied once, 3 years old, and then half of that she applied an herbicide on top of that, basically to break out some of the weeds that were going through it. The material that's used is Green Match EX. It's a D-limonene-based material, non-selective post-emergent herbicide. It really is pretty neat. I mean, it looks like you just spray paraquat. I don't know that it has the persistence in terms of control, length of control, but it is a pretty effective material. I just bought 2 pails for $680, so it's not an inexpensive material. So this is a shot of one of the treatments in 2009. Renee needed to get some mulch real fast in order to start this trial. So she actually purchased, you can see that's nice, fine, top quality landscape mulch. That's not economically feasible to use. It's about $28 a yard. In our trials, we've been using whole tree chips from a tree service for about $5 a yard. And I'm pulling these numbers out because I say these to the students every year and have them do the math. And I'm pulling this off the top of my head, but I want to say this comes out to $4,000 an acre or something outrageous. But if you shift it down to using whole tree service chips, which are either free or we pay $5 a yard, that brings it down into what would it come out to, $900 and something, but it lasts 2 or 3 years. So now you're getting into $200 or $300 a year, which seemed to make some sense for us. This is that mulch treatment after a couple years, and this is where Renee said, well, maybe we can take these treatments. She had enough replication, she broke it up and applied some herbicide in there. So she burned down some of the weeds that were growing in the mulch. So now we got an extra treatment out of it. And this is the herbicide treatment after one of the applications. Initially, they were mowing the weeds down and then applying the herbicide to the mowed weeds, because it says right on the label it shouldn't be more than 6 inches tall. And her farm manager said, this stuff's been working pretty well for a couple of years. Why don't we just spray it right on to 18-inch tall grasses and vetch and whatnot? And actually, it worked quite well and made kind of a nice living mulch, well, formerly living mulch in there. So the treatments look nice, I'll say. How are they performing? That's what I'll talk about. A lot of different data has been collected: weed biomass, soil moisture tension, midday stem water potential, so the actual tension of water in the plant, some tree growth, fruit yield, and foliar mineral assimilation. So looking first at the weed control in 2010, if you can sort of look at the mowing, and this is the grams per meter squared of basically green material growing underneath the tree. So weeds are broadly defined as a plant that you don't want growing, and she didn't want anything growing underneath. It shouldn't be surprising that the mowing, you really knock down the amount after you mow, and the arrows are when treatments were applied. But the mulch really did a good job in 2010 of keeping the weeds down season long. This is the second season of having the mulch down. The herbicides did fairly well too, and actually didn't, by the end of the season, didn't differ from the mowing, but also really didn't differ from the mulch treatment. So they worked fairly well. The economics are a different story. Like I say, a bucket of this stuff is $330 or something like that, and you use a lot of it. In 2011, it was similar to 2010, but the application of herbicide 2 times versus what it says mowing, that's 1 time, really wasn't any different. And our conditions in 2007 were extremely wet. We had biblical flooding. And I just don't, I think the amount of weed biomass growth there just was not enough to keep up with just having 1 or 2 applications of this material. You really had to be on top of things a lot. And again, the various mulch treatments and a more regular herbicide treatment, all controlled very similarly. Soil moisture tension, this is where we can actually measure how much force it takes to pull water out of the soil, and gives you an idea for how moist the soil is. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise that mowing or herbicide or things that don't provide cover to the soil had higher moisture tension, which means they were drier. Than the mulch. The mulch kept the soil moisture a little bit low, soil moisture a little higher. But the 3-time herbicide was interesting because it provided that kind of thick mulch by allowing those weeds to grow, killing them down. There was actually a cover on the surface. I don't think we had as much evapotranspiration or evaporation from the soil. Very similar in 2011. Again, a lower number means the soil's wetter, and you can see right up through early July it was, completely saturated. In our sandy soils at the UVM horticulture farm, we use 25 centibars as a trigger for thinking about irrigating. And for most of this is really the window that we irrigate the most, and she didn't need it at all. It did dry off a bit. And the 2-time herbicide treatment, for some reason, was a little bit lower, but I don't think anything was statistically different amongst these sets. Midday stem water potential measures the amount of water that's actually in the plant and basically the amount of force it takes to pull the water out of the plant. These are just curves from 4 different readings on 4 dates throughout the season. And we saw that the average tension, basically, so higher means it's drier, similar to the soil moisture tension. Again, very similar. The mowing, where we essentially aren't controlling for weeds. We've got a lot more water being pulled into a ground cover, provided less stem water potential to the plants. The mulch provided not only generally better, although not on every reading, but it was a little bit more consistent, and that, I don't think that was really surprising. 2011, again, the mulch treatment, we had the best stem water potential. And interestingly, this 3 times herbicide, I think because we were keeping more of a bare soil surface, was a little bit drier by mid-season. But by the end of the year, when the rains came back again, Hurricane Irene came in, I believe it was 4 days after this, but we had a few rains just prior to that, and the season turned quite wet by then, and by the end of the season there wasn't any difference between the treatments. So we're very different from the conditions here where you're applying every drop of water. Mother Nature puts most of her water on for us, and it's just during these windows that we need to adjust things. Tree growth, early on there was no difference in the treatments, and by 2010 the soil organic matter was getting a little bit higher in the mulch treatments, and this is where it turns purple, is where Renee added the herbicide treatment in there as well. You can see there's an effect of some of those weeds that were growing in that section that were sapping some of the moisture and probably some of the nutrients out of the ground. So she added the mulch and herbicide treatment. These were statistically different from the other sets. And this is similar to what we've seen not in a replicated way, but in a, over time, looking at the soil quality that we've seen in Burlington, in Vermont, is that as we've been mulching and as we've had orchards that we shifted to mulching, we've gotten more consistent growth and we've gotten greater tree growth. Yield, this is just a terrible slide, or just terrible numbers. We're getting less than 20 bushels per acre in these orchards. And I refer to that, it was not irrigated from day one, and we had some very droughty years and very hot years. These trees are pretty runted out, so that's not a, and there's no statistical effect from these treatments. The foliar nutrient levels, we have seen under the mulch treatments, potassium in both years, or in 2010, 2011, manganese in 2010, and zinc in 2011 were increased by the mulch applications, probably by increased soil organic matter. But they were generally similar among the different herbicide treatments in both years. And that's what we have. If there's any questions, I can call Renee up. I could probably answer a few things if you need to. Thank you.
Are there questions for Terry or Renee? You want to get her on the phone?
I was wondering, this herbicide, I think it's an organic.
It is, yep.
What is green mash? What is it?
It's it's lemon oil.
Lemon oil.
Lemon oil. D-limonene is the chemical it's the active ingredient that's labeled.
But it burns off.
Yeah, it's a burn down. It breaks down the waxy tissues on the surface of the trees. It makes the spray shed where we store it smell really nice, which is better than smelling lime sulfur or something like that. You can see the effects within a couple hours, and it just desiccates, opens up those pores in the cells and desiccates the plant. I mean, if you do it on a sunny day like this, within hours.
I have another one.
Yeah.
Bones? Didn't you have any problems with bones?
Not really. We do, I'm thinking about our orchard. I can't speak for her orchard. For our orchard, we're pretty scared of voles, I'll say. So we do keep guards on the trees. And the only time we've ever had problems with the guards, with voles, we take the guards off every year so that we don't have borer problems. And last year when we had, record level rainfall, we took the guards off in April. And I think the water table was so high. I mean, there was standing water in front of the orchards. The voles, which normally are, live below ground, were out and they were feeding on the, within that mulch and within the trees. But we lost 2 trees out of 300, so it's kind of minor. But yeah, it hasn't been a major issue that we've seen.
So one more question here.
I've heard there's 2 main issues with mulches, and one is that you can't readily or easily apply amendments.
Mm-hmm.
You can't remove it, and the other one's my life. So is that an issue? Like how do you manage that?
Right. I can't speak for Renee, but for us, I kind of live by the philosophy that as the mulches age, they become they tend to bind materials up. So we apply fertilizers right on top of the mulch, and over time it will incorporate. But we don't use brand new chips. The chips sit for 1 year, but really not more than 2. Because I don't want to be applying compost. I want to be applying good woody chips. You thought of the other thing.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Was in the mulches, the roots tend to grow up and start going into the mulch, which can make them more frost susceptible or maybe drought resistant.
Yeah, I haven't seen that because we've pulled it back and we've mulched our orchard 3 times now. After the first mulch basically broke down essentially into compost. We incorporated it into the soil and put the next application on top. And I didn't see a lot of roots in there. I saw a lot of weeds, especially quackgrass, growing into the top of the mulch. And the nice thing about that, it visually didn't look good, but often those roots weren't going down into the actual soil. They were staying in the mulch zone. So visually they weren't good, but we still treated them, pulled them, but I wasn't as concerned as if they were really growing down into the soil profile. But I didn't see it on the trees. I didn't see roots growing.
Thanks, Terry.
Yep.